Welcome back to another CommCon Virtual 2020 session. This time we're with Tony Gooch from Voxbone. Voxbone are one of our platinum sponsors. So thank you very much, Voxbone, for sponsoring and making this happen. Tony's going to talk about kind of bringing back control within the open ecosystem of SIP and what that really means for all of us and what maybe we should all be doing. I think that's what I've taken from his abstract. If I got that wrong, then Tony can tell me. But for now, I'm going to pass you over to Tony, and then I'll catch up with you and Tony afterwards. Thanks, Tony.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. So yes, dialing back telcos. I thought that was a lovely little ploy on words, but really what I'm here to kind of talk about today is how, as a product manager, I've been in the telco industry for 20 years, and I feel like there's a need to campaign towards driving us back towards a much more open ecosystem. So that's what I'm going to talk you through today. So really, that's the kind of main point that I want to talk through. And I know that there's a lot of technical audience here today, so it's not all going to be product-led. It's going to be talking about setting the scene for how the industry has evolved in my eyes, how standards and some of these examples in practice occur, and how that creates some challenges for interop. And then really talking about how integrations help and how that drives business ecosystems where ultimately everybody benefits and we all benefit from that open ecosystem architecture. And then obviously we'll be going on to Riot to have Q&A and conversations about what people thought to the presentation and getting that real kind of good conversation between all of the different aspects of our industry. So I'm really looking forward to that once we've done the presentation. But I always think it's useful for people to know who I am, where I've come from, and what my why is. So I obviously kind of have been in the industry for 20 years, initially as a developer. So I've had some really good experiences when I started. At 23, I managed to launch the first commercial location-aware service for Orange UK. So that was a really great service to locate where you were and give you back information on a voice level. So that was really innovative at the time. And then I've gone on to be a comms architect for around 8 years before then moving on to product management. But really my passion is about solving these interop problems, integrating platforms together. And really the driver for that is that I'm also a lean practitioner. So I really love solving challenges where we waste a load of time with difficulties, with lack of information. So this is really kind of where I'm setting the scene. I'm trying to give everybody that flexibility and toolkit to try and make everybody's life easy. So before I set the scene any further, what I want to really talk about is how I see the industry and how I think this has evolved. So again, I've been in the industry 20 years, started in 2000. And really where I came from is obviously I had exposure to large networks, so SS7, but the company size I was working with obviously had to do interop with that SS7, but we were really more working on an ISDN 30 basis. So we had some gateways, we did some transition from that. But the way I thought about the industry at that point is that we were doing research, choosing equipment, choosing the underlying carrier network that we were going to work for, wait for 12 weeks to get lines installed before you could finally move forward. So a lot of the work that you do in this industry at that time was an awful lot more of research planning, because you had to do that all from the outset. You had to get your plans together correctly and really then wait for everything to come together. So it was a much more kind of waterfall method. But where we are today, it's a massively different world. What we're seeing from Voxbone side is we're seeing 2, 3, 4 tools being used. All of these are SIP interfaceable. You have all sorts of communication options, whether you're a reseller, whether you're a development hub. you're probably using different tools for all sorts of different aspects of your business. But what we're also seeing is that some of these tool choices are not even like being used by, or not being forced by yourself as a comms architect or a lead in this space. Some of these are actually coming down from CIOs, from CEOs, and that's being forced on you. And the moniker I've heard an awful lot at the moment is Teams is free. Obviously, it's not free. You're paying for that as part of your O365 license. But I'll come on to where I think this is important to factor in for your future comms strategy. But a lot of this is now giving you options to immediately run and operate by choosing plans directly from these tools. So you can have this mix of plans or carriers interfaced with all of your tools. But everything is much more a go live immediately. So people can make an awful lot greater decisions to go and choose things, not necessarily even with the background research on what it will cost me to manage that long term. Is there a consideration for how I interrupt between the tools? And what we're finding is that these are leading on to future problems that people aren't aware of when they're making those more immediate decisions. So as I alluded to, I think there are some quite big problems with the ecosystem as it stands. One of my favorite things to talk about is dark IT. What we're finding now is that this is actually coming as a much greater challenge to the technical side of the business. One of my favorite examples of this is that the Nestle business, obviously a huge global organization. I think they have around 200,000 people. But one of the best examples of this was that at the same time, the CTO of Nestle was giving a talk about how they were choosing Microsoft Teams as their UC of choice. At the same time, within quite literally 12 hours of that announcement and that talk, the CIO, or pushed by the chief people person, had signed a contract to roll out Facebook Workplace globally. And I think this is a great example of it's not just small organizations that have these challenges, that actually in businesses, it is very possible for two distinct parts of the business to make selections on UC tools and actually have completely contrasting and competing challenges on making those things work together. And often what that creates is the challenge on how are you going to drive interop? How can you get Facebook Workplace or Teams to talk together or pass data? Because often these are challenges that will come up. And some of the decision making often doesn't consider the IT budgets for future planning. So some of the things that I've experienced from my own perspective is having a line item with with zero cost, as in Teams is free, often comes back to bite the business in the longer term. Because what it doesn't often recognize is that there is always a need to manage cost base based on decisions. So one of the things I often encourage some of our customers that we work with is if you are using Teams or the business is making those decisions to move across to a zero line item cost, that there should still be budgetary consideration added. So I suggest people take 15 or 20% of your O365 license cost and allocate that to the comms part of that platform. So that actually, as a comms lead, you are showing that there is actually budgetary spend and that is being used as part of that bigger piece. And I always think that's important because what that does is that up levels the conversation for your IT team to have that conversation with your finance officers to say, look, there is a budget here. We are spending this. This is a real cost that the business is paying for the unified comm strategy. But the other thing I think people often aren't recognizing right now is that costs actually are increasing dramatically when these decisions are not being made centrally. So Nomertis have come up with a really good set of analysis just into the coronavirus outbreak, where they were looking at the costs to businesses where more than one tool was used. And what that information really showed is that businesses, when they get to 2, 3, 4 tools, are actually spending often more than 2 times the amount that they could do if they were actually using this from a single unified strategy and making sure the business was being run in a really good structured way where a comms lead is actually making those decisions. But what we're also seeing in the industry is an awful lot more comms strategy really using close practice ideas. So I know we might be picking on the flavor of the month in Microsoft Teams, but actually some of the things that we're seeing in the industry right now is that the certified SBC strategy from Microsoft, while it has been successful, obviously lots and lots of users using Teams, there are still only 7 brands that are connected after 2 years. And obviously Microsoft are being quite picky about who they are partnering with. And what we're seeing in the marketplace is a lot of vendors are actually now launching services without Microsoft certification, simply because it doesn't make sense to wait for Microsoft certification. There are so many out there that are not certified by Microsoft that actually the ecosystem has already made the decision that actually having Microsoft certification doesn't mean anything to them. And Microsoft really have been missing a trick there. And we think from a voxbone side that actually the numbers Microsoft could have seen could have been even larger if they'd have embraced a more open strategy. So obviously Microsoft are still doing extremely well. But the other part of this is that what we've also seen in the marketplace is that Cisco's preferred media partner status for their collaboration option obviously is even more restrictive than Microsoft. To work with the preferred media partner capability with Cisco, you actually need physical links. You have to go through a sign-up process. You're talking about a lead time to get on board with Cisco of around 6 months. And what we've seen from our own business perspective is an awful lot of Cisco partners and users have been left hanging where they've had to try and adapt in a very quick manner. So what we're really kind of saying here is that with this kind of adaptable, with this real-time type of approach, what we're seeing that really needs to happen is that when you are using telco, where you've got this open connectivity, having this kind of close practice really doesn't make an awful lot of sense. And the way we think about that is really around SIP is a standard. It is something that is very well defined. And it's very easy for partners to work within standards. And sure, there are differences, but we think of this as more somebody putting blockers in. And if we take this to the HTTP space in just internet land, it's like saying, hey, somebody, you need to certify before you can access our website. We really do think it's quite a bonkers idea, given that what we're really talking about is SIP. And how many of us in the industry are basically working together? We think this is just a crazy idea to create certification when actually it's just SIP underneath it. So what do we think about how we could do this better? So one of the things that we really kind of believe in is that we're trying to do, from our own perspective, publishing more about how we use SIP, how we've interpreted the SIP spec. So we do have requirements. There are things that we major in terms of regulatory compliance, where we've adapted SIP spec to meet those regulatory needs in a global sense. But what we're trying to do in our knowledge base is publish those differences from the norm. So we're trying to make it easily accessible for people to see what we've done differently. We're also really passionate about trying to have test labs available. So if people want to work with us, we've got test labs that we can work with. People can come and see exactly how we work and work with us before spending any money. So that's also something we think that's really sensible for the general ecosystem to work on. If you want to work with us, we just ask basically, hey, have you got an open lab? Can you make this available? and we're then happy to exchange capability and work with you on getting an integration done. And we just think it's a really sensible way of doing this kind of interop within the SIP world. And what does that all mean? Really, for us, it means integrations within days. And I think that's the general view, is that some of these organizations, obviously Cisco, have had their cubes certified. My understanding from industry knowledge is that this was something like a 9-month process. I just think it's crazy to wait that long for an interop between SIP. So really, we think that kind of interop is something that we can do within days. And ultimately, often that's more around maybe an hour or two to actually get a couple of calls together, and documenting it for the benefit of our joint customers or prospects out there is something that just really makes an awful lot of sense. But one of the things I've been obviously really passionate about is looking at where this openness really does make a difference. And one of the great examples, I think, is Aircall. And on LinkedIn recently, their co-founder shared one of their fundraising decks. And obviously they've withheld what the actual financial figures are, but I think some of these graphs really give an amazing set of information on how partner ecosystem, when you're open and transparent with capability, can make a massive difference. And I think the key one is this last graph. Obviously, Aircall has been massive in its growth capability and really became an industry icon for what they've achieved in this space. But what I think really demonstrates the great value of this open ecosystem idea is where you look at how quickly their partner ecosystem have overtaken their capability. They've increased beyond Aircall's own financial figures within half the time. And what that's done is that's obviously delivered really great value in terms of the capability. But what that's done is that's powered Aircall's growth in an equal exponential factor. And I think this is the model that I really kind of believe in, that having this openness actually can outperform any kind of certification program. One of the things I'm obviously proud of is we also support Aircall in that industry. So we think that actually some of that is around underpinning and building with partners like this, that the global reach of our system can really help that end-to-end capability. And again, this is obviously a very virtuous cycle. The idea that we really like is the more interconnections that people can do, the easier customers can set it up. We think that actually this is where the use case aspect comes in. Not one single person can come up with all of the ideas to solve all of the challenges in a worldwide perspective. We're not specialists in the IoT space. We're not specialists in areas outside of the core network and the delivery that we do. But we think that's really where that innovation comes in. All of you with your different use cases, if there is this openness available, you can come up with all of your use cases, but based on a very easy, very interconnected platform capability. And ultimately, all of those use cases drive more business for everybody. So I think that's the idea of really what we're trying to build out and give that capability and really give that platform level so everybody can succeed. And it's not to the detriment of one manufacturer or another based on who got certification first. But really where I want to kind of come on to is talking about we are all using SIP, right? We're all using standards, WebRTC. This is all, I think, what makes our industry so great, that there are standards that we can work towards. And that really does give us this improved market access. It allows us to interface between customers or suppliers with ease. So it doesn't matter whether you're an end provider building your own product or an enterprise building capability. The idea is this common language allows that flexibility between each of us and gives that much better relationship to allow us to work through challenges where there are interop issues using that common language. And the idea of that ability to produce and deliver innovative products really is benefiting from that. Everybody can put their overlay, their capability over the top of that standard to drive all of those innovative and capable products. And it may well be that it's not just a single feature, but what you might be doing is linking the Teams and Facebook platform. All of those ideas of giving those capabilities for businesses where they might struggle otherwise is really, really important. But the other thing we really believe in is we really like the idea of all of those new standards that are being thought of. So the capability to replace SIP in the future with a more HTTP reliant standard. Obviously, we're working on those types of things in the background as well. And we really think that's also massively important, that we're all thinking about what's next and how we can transition and support that interop between both the current industry standard and what's coming on in the future and how we can provide that interop. So that's the idea of like how we think about standards from a base level. But really what I want to talk about now and really hopefully give some more information to the technical audience is where this really comes back to underpinning on some of the technical detail we find in practice. And we all interpret SIP specs differently. So I'm not kind of picking on these companies, but really what I'm trying to do is show you some examples where we've seen interop issues. And what we've obviously done, we'll come on to some really technical innovation that we think we've helped with trying to solve some of these challenges. So Dialogic, BN4000 SBCs, really have a great PDF, shows what capabilities they've got in terms of what SIP specs they support, and that they really do show support for RFC 2615 and 3665. But when we came to do interop with them, one of the things that we believe in from a security perspective at voxbone is that we don't do IP whitelisting. We actually want to move to a much more granular way of controlling access. So we think SIP digest header is the minimum for connectivity nowadays. And obviously, when we were trying to interop, there was no SIP digest at all within the SBC. So that created a problem. Obviously, Dialogic is a very prevalent SBC. So we've had to think about ways that we could adapt to that, but still create a secure way of connectivity without going back to IP whitelisting, where IP spoofing is still a great challenge. So we've got some ideas, but that was one of the interop problems that we encountered and we needed to work through. One of my other pet peeves is CPaaS platforms, and obviously I'm not choosing a single one, but one of the things that I really kind of have to work through is a lot of providers that we work with really want to interconnect Twilio, SignalWire, all of these different CPaaS platforms. But what they want to do is they want to have the reduced cost from us and use us right across the board. So we've got BYOC capability with all these platforms. But what we really struggled with is all of these platforms really don't support the full set of SIP verbs. So we can't do diversion headers in a lot of cases. We can't do privacy. There's an awful lot of gap in terms of the SIP verb capability within these platforms. They do support a small number, but obviously not to the full extent that we would like. So again, what we've had here is a set of challenges where we want to work through how do we bring capability to these platforms without then creating challenges to go to each of them in turn and ask for different things. So again, another challenge here that we had to think about and work through, and it's a slightly different aspect to the first one. Obviously, Microsoft Teams doesn't avoid differences in the way it's built and configured its SIP interface. One of the things that we found odd when we were looking into this is the requirements for contact header in the options message. Obviously, the SIP spec does allow for options, in the contact header. So it is something that we can obviously deal with. It is available, but actually when we work with all of the capabilities and integrations that we do, it's something that we don't see very often. So again, it's very much the case of there are some capabilities in the Microsoft Teams options that really don't translate into the wider industry. So again, something else that we need to think about, and how would we work with that in our system. Genesis Cloud, also a really good example of something that was completely left field to us. And when they were doing transfers between internal stations out to voxbone, what they were doing is they were changing the diversion routing, and they were doing it in a reverse order. So what we were getting is that this was the most recent user that was doing the transport. So basically doing the transfer into the voxbone network. But what we were getting is the diversion header was showing us the first instance of what they were connecting to. And our system was basically trying to work out who this organization was. Why were they not sending this in a situation where we were getting the voxbone number that they were trying to transfer to on this first user? So again, another interesting example. We think this is a slight deviation from the SIP spec, but again, obviously Genesis are very happy with this. It's not something they're going to want to change. So again, this gives a really good example of the types of challenges that we look and find out there in the world, and how we have to think about how we accommodate these things, even if they're slightly divergent from what we think is correct. And obviously, I'm picking on all of these different companies. We are not exempt from this, and again, I think this is important to show that we do have our own interpretation of specs. There are scenarios where we're as guilty as everybody else of coming up with something that creates problems for a specific use case. And this one was actually from an SBC provider. And what they were really interested on having is that they believed in a much more capable SBC, where they wanted the ability to hide devices behind their SBC, but still allow them to individually choose what they were going to respond with the D2F capability. So here what we've got is that we've got our statement back from our support center back to the customer, where we're saying, actually, we do support SIP info, but actually what you need to do is you have to send the original request with the allowed method in, and we will absolutely proxy that through and support that on an end-to-end manner through our environment. The customer or prospect in this case wasn't really happy with that. What they wanted is they wanted us to come back with the allow method, presenting back from our network what we did support. But that was not the way that our system is set up to do. We'd interpreted that to allow the UA to pass what they wanted, and that we would then support that through an end-to-end environment. But I thought what was great is that obviously the prospect really showed us here exactly what they thought of us during this time. And obviously that was a piece of business that we didn't win. But it is the case that these things happen, right? It's not a situation where every single use case will be accounted for. There will be differences between different people's interpretations and different needs right across their user base. And our system still does not support this capability. It's not to say that we don't want to accommodate every scenario. It's just that this was the only use case that we'd had required for that in the last 12 months, the only single requirement that came across. And sure, when we get an opportunity to look at this versus other roadmap items, we are going to do that. But I think it was important to kind of be as self-critical during this process of looking at ourselves and say, we're also guilty of these kinds of situations. So what does that all mean from my perspective? Well, standards are always interpreted. The SIP specs, all of these RSC specs, do have that options of must, should, and may. Ultimately, we all have that interpretation for our use case. But I think what I'm asking people to do is think about the impacts of those decisions. Are you doing something that you're choosing a may when you're doing your implementation? Because if you are choosing that may, what you probably need to do is think about the way that you document that for other parties. So if there are interconnection capabilities that people are looking to get into your products, and you may not know them yet, people might come up with innovative ways to bolt things onto your products in the wider ecosystem. And having that consideration of, hey, you're using this may in the spec, creating some kind of document to reflect that in the way that you're documenting your business decision, so that the open and wider ecosystem can access that, I think is really massively important. But the other thing I really want to kind of come on to now is talking about building some flexibility into your products, because we have got standards, but there are always those use cases where it may not well be the case that we can accommodate every scenario based on the existing business that we might have built already. So coming on to what I've worked with our developers to build in the last 6 months is the idea of what I'm terming header rewrite. And the way I kind of think about this, and the way I kind of landed this from a product management perspective, is I said to them, really what I want is I want a diff feature for headers. So I want to be able to say, hey, I don't like what you're sending across to me. Can we alter this part of the header to support some modification to it? And the reason I chose headers is that actually in SIP land, I really do think headers are really where most of the mismatches on interop occur. Obviously at Voxbone, we're really passionate about producing guides to show how to get easily up and running with a vast variety of capability out there in the marketplace. We've added something like 6 or 7 interop guides in the last kind of 4 weeks. And we're trying to do that at the kind of pace to get to around 40 or 50 integrations by this time next year. And really what that needs me to have that capability to do is, where we find these interop challenges, some capability to really give myself the option to go, right, okay, there's one simple thing that I need to change. I don't know, the diversion header is slightly different, or user agent is slightly different, or something that we don't like or want to work with, we just want to change. So that's the example that we're kind of working through. We've built this tool to really aid the interop capability, and it's having massive benefits in the ways that we're working. So coming back to the examples that I was given, what we've been able to do is we've been able to solve that Dialogic challenge right from the outset. We're simply using an ability within the Dialogic where we can put custom headers in that SBC very, very easily. So we're basically just passing a custom header, X-user header, basically into the Voxbone platform, and then we're modifying that header using this rewrite tool to basically change that to support a proper digest. And then it goes through the network as is, and we're happy that we've then built a security capability that we can use where SBCs or any other device can't use digest. And it's still surprisingly common how many devices we find out there on Marketplace that don't have that security feature. We've been able to do a massive amount of extension in the work with CPaaS providers. So we can use the same principle, using the custom headers, which all of the CPaaS providers support. And again, what we then do is simply strip off the X-dash, and we've then got full SIP capability with the CPaaS providers. So again, it's provided a huge capability to then sync the underlying network, do diversion, do all sorts of interop with all sorts of platforms where some of these systems then can't do the interop directly with the platform itself. And lastly, working with that, what we thought was a non-compliant capability in Genesis, what we can do is we can look at that diversion order, tweak the way that that's written, and actually still then perform that in the way that we'd like to. But the best thing about this capability is it's simply extensible. So it's not a tool that we've built once and we've custom coded all of the interop challenges. It's about the flexibility in the platform that if there are differences in the spec, we can accommodate them with a very straightforward extensible language inside the business. And again, that's our interpretation of where we needed the extensibility. Yours might be different, but the idea of coming back to that idea of if we have an interop that we're working with, if you had a guide where you were showing what interpretations you'd made that were not necessarily musts or shoulds, and you start to have those mays that are slightly grey in the way that they're used in the wider industry, if that was an easy accessible doc, what it does is it shortens the integration time by a significant amount. So again, my hope is that you kind of start to see how this all links back to the technology aspect, how as a product manager, I'm thinking about the standards, I'm thinking how that links on to all of the other component parts in our system, and gives you the idea of going from business benefits all the way through to how developers then are able to build this functionality to really help us all succeed in the business world. So the one thing I want to do, and obviously I'm looking forward to chatting about this with people, is how many of you don't have more than one platform or tool or product that consumes SIP? My guess is that there'll be very few of you. If there are people out there that have only got one platform, I commend you. My hope will be that will be somebody that is very dynamic in their business, and they're actually driving the right conversations with the right people in at the top level of the business to drive a really solid comm strategy, that they understand the benefits from a cost perspective. But I'm really looking forward to the conversation following the meeting to really get an understanding of, are you in that same space? Have you thought about the costs? Are you thinking about ways to interop between those platforms to really drive benefits to your business? So really looking forward to that conversation, and I'm really interested to hear what we get from the wider audience. But really what I wanted to do was leave you with my end vision. As I say, really the idea of 40 or 50 integrations is very much the idea. I think we're at about a dozen at this point in time. But this diagram is really about not necessarily naming platforms. It's really about, if you want to bring a SIP-enabled pink elephant on a skateboard to us, we are more than happy to do an interop. The idea is that no matter what the future brings, what voxbone are trying to do is really give that interop at the carrier layer. We want to give everybody that option. Like, if there is interop challenges and you're struggling on global reach, or you're trying to connect capability across the world or through different platforms and they don't work together directly, think of us and we might be the layer to help connect everything. Again, it's very much an ethos of trying to say to people, like, we're trying to basically build the right ecosystem from the ground up, and say hopefully this community is very much that audience that embraces that, is thinking on the same lines. And obviously we'd love to chat to you if you've got anything that you want to follow up on or are interested in the product. So how to reach us? Obviously LinkedIn, my own details are there. Obviously love to engage in telco people. Really love to hear interesting use cases. So if there's anything that people want to chat to, obviously reach out to me directly. But the voxbone company address is there, our website and our email. So obviously reach out to us. We love having these conversations. We're a telco first organization. Obviously lots of people know Tori as well. We love chatting to people about all of the innovation in the SIP space. So reach out to us, chat to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Tony. That was great. Voxbone is one of our platinum sponsors, as I said earlier, and we'll be doing a session with them in a couple of hours' time with a in-depth interview with Tony about Voxbone, what they do with open source software, what Tony just mentioned. Tori Searle there. Tori does a lot of development on Asterisk, and is pretty well known within the telecommunication space. So Voxbone, for me, I've known Voxbone for quite a few years because of Tori. And then a couple of years ago, I did some work with Voxbone on a WebRTC product with them. And I guess I'm just very good friends with Voxbone now as an organization. They're one of the good guys within this space. And it was really interesting kind of listening to you, Tony, talk about Genesis and all of these kind of platforms and the CPaaS kind of platforms with SIP interop. But then we've also got platforms like Amazon Connect, which just completely and utterly disregard SIP entirely, and kind of force everything out via the PSTN, which to me is complete and utter madness. Do you think we're going to see more of these kind of players kind of bring up their call center systems in the cloud and kind of in their own way kind of force people to carry on using them because of only PSTN connectivity?
I mean, I do see, and again, this really was the ethos of the conversation. It was trying to bring the ideas where we see that kind of disregard for standards to the fore, and say, obviously, we're trying to do our bit to try and kind of reject some of those ideas to try and help people get back to it. Some of the things that like we're trying to think about doing along those lines is we think one of the kind of neat features that we might be able to bring is potentially provide SIP addresses for Teams Direct routed users. So instead of having to dial them, the idea is that we might be able to provide a SIP interop layer onto Teams Direct routed users. So whatever platform you want to interop, you might be able to then do that through Voxbone through SIP addressing. So we're trying to think of ways where we can open up some of these closed loop networks in ways that our network can then support that and provide that interop between different platforms and capabilities. That's again, it's coming back to there are business drivers there, but it's more about we're trying to create ways that actually businesses outside of those kind of giants like Microsoft and Amazon, etc., can access those kinds of capabilities. So we don't end up with like the monoliths being the only people that can control those kind of UC platforms. We want that opportunity to get all of those small players. And obviously, one of the things I love about what you're doing today, Dan, is obviously using JuxD and all of these open source platforms where they are the innovators in the world, right? That it's not the Microsofts that are coming out with these new features in the quickest manner. So that's really where we see ourselves fitting, is more of that of an enabler to try and maybe link the big enterprise players and then the smaller vendors together through that common interface.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to having that conversation over on Riot in just a few minutes' time. So that's riot.commcon.xyz. The link will be in the description below. And then Tony will also be around in the Voxbone sponsor room as well. So make sure you go and talk to Voxbone about all of your telecommunication needs. I would just want to say thank you again to Tony, and we'll see me, in a couple of hours, probably in different clothes. We'll see you soon. Don't go anywhere quite yet, though. We've got to say thank you to all of our sponsors. Without them, none of this would have even happened in the first place. So for our platinum sponsors, we've got Toulouse, Voxbone, and Ciara. For our gold sponsors, we've got the Matrix Foundation, Vonage, Sangoma, Telviva, and Loway. Our silver sponsors are Aptosay, Pion, Telco Bridges with ProSBC, Avoxy, 8x8 with Jitsi, and FirstCom Europe. And we've also got community sponsors, QXIP and Cycor Systems. Without any of them, this would never have even happened. You wouldn't have had all of this free content on YouTube. So go say thank you to all of them. Go look at what they provide, what services they offer, and have a conversation with them all. over on Riot, riot.commcon.xyz. The link will be in the description below, along with links to all of our sponsors. You can go and watch preview videos from all of our gold sponsors right now over on YouTube. The links will be somewhere over here. All I've got to say is thank you to all of our sponsors, and I'll see you over on the Q&A shortly. Cheers.